The conquest of Earthicus, designated Earth by its inhabitants, was a model of efficiency. My fleet, the glorious Imperium of Zorp, executed the planetary subjugation protocol in 7 standard hours. Our tachyon lances vaporized their orbital defenses before they could even power up. Our kinetic bombardment platforms silenced their primary military installations in a matter of minutes. Supreme Commander of the 7th Fleet, it fell to me to select the site for our new planetary capital, our citadel of governance. My logic was, as always, irrefutable. We needed a location that was strategically insignificant to avoid residual uprisings, with a stable climate and easily reconfigurable infrastructure. My tactical analysis led me to a small, ludicrously uniform sector of dwellings in the North American continent designated Maple Creek Estates. It was a masterpiece of pointless conformity, with identical structures and meticulously maintained, non-native flora. It was pathetic, and therefore, perfect. I descended in my personal command vessel, the inevitable truth, a warship that had broken the will of a dozen star systems. It settled with a gentle, ground-shaking tremor in the center of what the locals called a cul-de-sac, its obsidian hull drinking the pathetic yellow light of their star. The scorched earth from my landing thrusters instantly improved the drab green of the surrounding lawns. My shock troops had already secured the perimeter, their plasma rifles humming. The smoldering husks of the primitive human tanks they had disabled were piled neatly on a corner lot. I had taken my rightful place as the new ruler of this world. I was in the middle of a strategic briefing with Subjugator Grohl, planning the systematic dismantling of the planet's remaining infrastructure, when the first anomaly occurred. A human female, clad in pastel-colored fabrics and armed with a rectangular piece of processed wood pulp attached to a metal clip, was marching directly toward my warship. Overlord, Grohl growled, his 4 mandibles clattering in confusion. A native is approaching. It appears to be unarmed, yet it displays no fear signals. Its threat posture is indeterminate. Stand down, Grohl, I commanded, intrigued by this display of illogical bravery. Let us see what this creature wants. Perhaps it is their designated leader, come to offer the planet's formal surrender. The female did not offer a surrender. She did not kneel. She stopped at the edge of the crater my landing gear had made, looked at my magnificent, system-conquering warship, then looked down at her clipboard, and then back at me. She made a small, irritating ticking sound with a primitive ink-dispensing device. "Excuse me," she said, her voice a horrifying blend of forced cheerfulness and profound condescension. "Are you the new property owner? I am the overlord of this planet. I am your new reality." I rumbled, my voice modulator set to the Thinspire Terror frequency. "Fantastic," she said with a smile that did not reach her cold, dead eyes. "I'm Brenda, the president of the Maple Creek Estates Homeowners Association. Welcome to the neighborhood. I'm just here to deliver your initial packet of covenants, conditions, and restrictions, and unfortunately, to issue you your first set of violation notices." She took a single sheet of paper from her clipboard and held it out to me. Grohl took it, his claws carefully avoiding touching her. I read the translated text on my wrist-mounted display. Violation Notice #2024A infraction, non-compliant lawn ornamentation. Per Article 4, Subsection B of the Maple Creek Covenants, all lawn decorations, including but not limited to pink flamingos, garden gnomes, and disabled interstellar warships, must be pre-approved by the Architectural Review Committee. Remedy: remove the unapproved structure within 24 hours. I stared at the notice, then at my warship, then back at the notice. I am Overlord Cathar. My ship is a monument to my glory. It is not a flawed ornament. Furthermore, Brenda continued, unperturbed, I have to cite you for an unapproved exterior color modification. She pointed a manicured finger at the beautiful, black, glassy crater my thrusters had made. Our approved lawn color palettes are emerald green, summer verdant, and slightly parched beige. Obsidian scorch is not on the list. You'll need to resod that immediately. My initial analysis was that the human female, Brenda, was an anomaly, a rogue agent suffering from a severe logic deficiency. I ordered my troops to ignore her. This was a tactical error of a magnitude I had not made since the disastrous Kalashian rebellion of Cycle 9. The next morning, I awoke to find a new, larger notice affixed to the main view screen of the inevitable truth. It was a final warning and informed me that due to my failure to remedy the initial violations, a daily fine of $100 was being levied against me. Furthermore, a lien had been placed upon my property. My warship. Growl, I roared, my voice echoing through the silent command deck. What is the meaning of this lien? Subjugator Growl, who I had tasked with analyzing the packet of human legal documents Brenda had left, looked up from his datapad, his mandibles twitching in a way that suggested extreme distress. Overlord, he began, as best as our logic processes can determine, a lien is a conceptual weapon of ownership. She has laid a claim on your vessel as collateral for your unpaid lawn care debts. According to this document, she now partially owns the inevitable truth. The sheer, unadulterated absurdity of the statement almost caused my primary brain to shut down. I had conquered a planet. I had not filled out the proper landscaping request forms. Brenda's assault was relentless, and it was not limited to me. Grohl began receiving panicked reports from the troop commanders, my shock infantry, hardened veterans who had fought psychic space squids in the nebulae of Andromeda, were being systematically broken by passive aggression. One of Brenda's associates, a human male named Gary who seemed to be in a permanent state of apologetic terror, had been going from soldier to soldier, informing them that their plasma cannons, while impressive, were technically violating the light pollution bylaws. Another, a female named Carol, had left polite but firm notes on the immobilized human tanks, citing them for being of inoperable vehicles and at a neighborhood I saw, and informing us that if the refuse was not properly disposed of in an approved receptacle by Thursday, which was trash day, further fines would be issued. The troops are confused, Overlord, Grohl reported, his voice heavy. They are trained for combat, for assault, for subjugation. They are not trained for polite, written requests to please move their anti-aircraft emplacements as they are blocking the sidewalk. Morale was plummeted. Sergeant Kavok was seen weeping in his barracks after the human female, Carol, told him his defensive perimeter was a bit of a mess and offered him a lemon bar. In a moment of frustration, a display of the power I still possessed, I ordered a low-power laser strike on Brenda's personal communication pylon, what they called a mailbox. It was a satisfying, if petty, act. I watched it vaporize into a cloud of glowing ash. This, I thought, will send a message. It did. An hour later, Gary appeared, nervously holding out 2 new violation notices. The first was a $500 fine for destruction of association property. The second was a $1,000 fine for installation of an unapproved mailbox modification, the pile of glowing ash, with a note at the bottom, in Brenda's cheerful, looping script, that read, P.S. The committee will also need to approve the energy signature of any new installations. This one is giving off far too much gamma radiation. Please correct. And then they towed my landing craft. I had left it parked on the street, and apparently, this violated the overnight parking rule. I watched on my security monitor as a primitive, wheeled human vehicle, with the words Bubba's towing on the side, hooked its claws into my sleek, interstellar scout ship and just dragged it away. My men could have vaporized it in a second, but they were too psychologically broken to act. They just watched, their shoulders slumped in defeat. The war for Earth was not being fought with lasers and tanks. It was being fought with bylaws and procedural notices. I was losing, and I didn't even understand the rules of engagement. In a final, desperate gambit, I decided to meet the enemy on their own turf. I would use their system against them. I agreed to attend the emergency HOA board meeting that had been called to discuss my numerous and flagrant violations. The battle was held in a small, windowless room in what they called the community center. The air smelled of stale coffee and quiet desperation. I, Overlord K. Thar, conqueror of the 7 systems, sat at a folding plastic table, across from Brenda and her board of directors. There was Gary, who wouldn't make eye contact. There was Carol, who was arranging a plate of cookies. And there was a human male named Stan, who seemed to be vibrating with a rage that had been simmering for decades. "All right, let's call the meeting to order," Brenda said, banging a small wooden hammer. "First on the agenda, the minutes from the last meeting's bake sale committee. For the next hour, I was subjected to a form of psychological torture so advanced it was almost beautiful in its cruelty. They discussed the allocation of funds for a new pet waste station. Stan delivered a 20-minute, impassioned monologue about the unacceptable length of the grass on Lot 17. Carol's motion to switch the brand of complimentary coffee was debated with a ferocity I had not seen since the siege of Cygnus X1. I tried to interject. "I am the ruler of this planet," I boomed. "Point of order, Madam President," Stan said, his eyes narrowed at me. "Is a galactic domination on the approved agenda?" "It is not, Stan," Brenda said, giving me a pitying look. "Katha, I'm afraid you're out of order. We'll add you to the new businesses section after the discussion about the seasonal planting schedule." I tried to use logic. I explained that their rules were irrelevant in the face of my absolute power. Carol responded by asking if I had filed my request to speak in triplicate and submitted it to the secretary at least 48 hours in advance, as stipulated in Bylaw 7.3. I tried to intimidate them. I let my claws extend, my eyes glow with an inner fire. Stan just shook his head. "Look, the aggressive posturing is a clear violation of the community's unably conduct clause, Article 9. I'm going to have to ask you to retract the death clause, or I'll make a motion to have you censored." This was a nightmare. This was a battle I could not win. They were not fighting me. They were fighting my very presence with a weapon I had no defense against. Utter, soul-crushing banality. The final blow came when I finally got my turn to speak. "I hereby declare this association dissolved," I proclaimed. "This planet is under the absolute authority of the Zorpian Imperium. Your rules are meaningless." Brenda just smiled that same cold, terrible smile. "That's a very interesting motion, Katha," she said. "Stan, do I have a second on the motion to declare all of our rules meaningless?" "Absolutely not," Stan sneered. "The motion fails to carry," Brenda said, banging her little hammer. "Now, onto the seasonal planting schedule. Carol, you have the floor. I'm hearing good things about Patinis this year." I just sat there, defeated, a being of immense power, a conqueror of worlds, rendered completely impotent by Robert's rules of order. I had faced down black holes and psychic fleets, but I had no counter for this. I had no power here. My Faudo transmission to the Zorpian High Command was a difficult one to compose. To the Emperor, I dictated, my voice heavy with a shame that would echo through my lineage for 1,000 cycles. "The conquest of Earthicus has failed. The human species possesses a form of societal warfare for which we have no counter. It is a psychological weapon of immense power, a labyrinth of self-replicating, illogical regulations enforced by a cabal of hyper-aggressive, passive-aggressive priesthoods. They call it Enrage HOA. We have been fined, we have been towed, we have been censured. I recommend immediate and total withdrawal. Do not engage. Do not make eye contact. And for the love of the void, do not park your warship on the grass." Katha, signing off. We left that night. We lifted off in shame, leaving behind a perfectly manicured, beige-colored suburb that had defeated an empire. As the inevitable truth broke atmosphere, I took one last look at Maple Creek Estates, and I swear I could see Brenda standing on her lawn, holding a ruler up to a neighbor's blade of grass, a look of grim satisfaction on her face. A week later, I was sitting in my repurposed living room. The wife was out at her book club. The kids were asleep. It was quiet. Back to normal. Almost. I took a sip of my beer, the cool glass feeling good against my hand, which was still a little sore from all the high fives after the aliens had fled. "Honey, I'm home," Brenda called, her voice echoing from the front hall. "In here." I called back. She walked in, setting her purse down on the counter we had fashioned from a salvaged alien control panel. "Tough day at the office?" I asked. "You have no idea, Gary," she said with a long, weary sigh. She kicked off her shoes and came over to the couch, slumping down next to me. "Stan is trying to pass an amendment to regulate the acceptable brightness of holiday lighting, and Carol wants to form a subcommittee to investigate the emotional impact of non-native bird species. It's just one battle after another." I nodded sympathetically. I looked over at the fireplace. My plasma rifle, which I had taken from a defeated alien shock trooper, was leaning against the mantelpiece. It made trimming the hedges a breeze. In the corner, the soft, blue glow of the captured Zorpian energy core powered our entire house, and, more importantly, the sprinkler system. I said, putting my arm around her. "You saved the world, Brenda." She just snorted, a small, unladylike sound. She leaned her head on my shoulder. "Don't be ridiculous, Gary," she said, her eyes already scanning the living room for any imperfections. "I wasn't trying to save the world. I was just trying to protect our property values." She then sat up straight, her eyes narrowing as she looked out the front window. "Is that the Henderson's trash can?" she whispered, her voice a low, dangerous hiss. "It's 9:15. The truck came at 8. That's a clear violation." I just sighed and took another sip of my beer. The aliens were gone. But in Maple Creek Estates, the war was far from over. My name is Kyle Peterson, and for 10 glorious, deeply misspent years of my life, I was a volunteer moderator for the Subsector 7 Intor Fandom Starship Debate Forum. It was a thankless job. My days were a blur of deleting arguments about whether a Star Destroyer could beat the Enterprise, banning users who using all caps, and patiently explaining to grown men that, no, their fan fiction about a romantic relationship between a Wookiee and a Vulcan was not, in fact, canon. It was a crucible of pure, uncut, weaponized pedantry. I thought it was the most meaningless job in the universe. As it turns out, it was the most important diplomatic training a human could ever receive. The trouble started when I, through a series of increasingly poor life choices involving a bad poker hand and a cargo hold full of what I was told were exotic space ferns, was arrested by the axiom of the magicians. The magicians were exactly what their name implied. They were a species of tall, crystalline beings whose entire society was based on pure, unassailable, mathematical logic. They did not have emotions. They did not have opinions. They only had verifiable facts and deductive reasoning. To them, a lie was not a moral failing. It was a syntax error. I was charged with a violation of the Interspecies Commerce Accord, subsection Gamma, paragraph 9, the unauthorized transport of a Class 3 narcotic plant. That exotic space ferns, it turned out, were a highly illegal combat stimulant that, when smoked, made a Cathar warrior twice as angry and 3 times as likely to challenge a vending machine to a duel. I was in deep trouble. My court-appointed logic advocate was a crystalline being named Unit 734. It informed me, in a voice that sounded like a calculator having a polite disagreement with itself, that my situation was logically indefensible. "The evidence is incontrovertible," Unit 734 stated, its crystalline facets shimmering with pure, unadulterated reason. "The ship's manifest, signed by you, lists the cargo. The cargo was found in your possession. Your guilt is a mathematical certainty. The trial will be a formality. It will last approximately 3.74 minutes. A formality? Who?" I said, a slow, familiar grin spreading across my face. I had spent a decade arguing with people who believed a lightsaber could cut through Captain America's shield. A court of law run by sentient calculators? This wasn't a trial. This was a Tuesday afternoon on the internet. "Logic boy," I said. "Let's dance." The courtroom was a sterile, white chamber. There was no jury, just a single, massive crystalline adjudicator who sat on a raised platform. The prosecutor, a sharp-angled being named Primary Inquisitor's Editor, began. "State your designation," it chimed, its voice a series of pure, logical tones. "Kyle Peterson," I said. "Though, for the record, I'm more of a Kyle P. online. My handle is SwampCoreBreach87. Feel free to follow me." The judicator paused, its internal processes worrying. The concept of a handle is not relevant to this proceeding. Let the record show the defendant is designated Kyle Peterson. "Objection," I said, standing up. "My online identity is a core component of my personal brand. To disregard it is to disregard my very essence. This is a clear case of ad hominem." The room fell silent. I could practically hear the sound of 1,000 crystalline brains trying to process the concept. "The defendant's personal brand is not a legal entity," the prosecutor chimed, a hint of what might have been confusion in its tones. "Oh, isn't it?" I shot back. "So you're saying that a person's reputation, the sum of their public interactions, has no bearing on their character? Are you a characterist? Are you biased against people with a strong online presence? Because that sounds like a pretty clear violation of my rights." The judicator word for a full 30 seconds. "The defendant's point is it's an unexpected variable. Proceed, Inquisitor, but tread with logical caution." The prosecutor, already looking a little flustered, presented its first piece of evidence. "We present the ship's manifest, which clearly lists the cargo as agricultural spoils, signed by the defendant." "I see a signature," I said, leaning forward. "But can you prove, beyond any and all doubt, that I was the one who signed it? Have you conducted a full biosignature and chronological ink fading analysis? Because my cousin, Barry, has a very similar signature. And Barry, well, let's just say Barry has a history with exotic ferns. This sounds a lot like whataboutism, Your Honor. The defendant is referring to a relative not present in this court," the prosecutor asked, turning to the judicator. "It's a classic red herring," I explained helpfully. "You accuse me, and I bring up my cousin Barry. Now we have to spend the next hour talking about Barry. It's brilliant. You guys should really write this down." The judicator's facet started to flicker with a faint, uncertain light. "The introduction of Barry is a tangential data point. However, the defendant's assertion of doubt is, technically, a valid logical query. Inquisitor, do you have definitive proof that Barry does not exist and or was not involved?" The prosecutor just stood there, its internal processes smoking. It had spent millennia in a society of pure truth. The concept of just making up a cousin named Barry was a logical impossibility it was not equipped to handle. Act 2, the Socratic method of annoyance. The trial, which was supposed to take 3.74 minutes, was now entering its 4th hour. The prosecutor, Primary Inquisitor's Editor, was beginning to show visible signs of distress. Its crystalline structure was vibrating at a low, resonant frequency, a sign of extreme cognitive dissonance. "Let us proceed to the core of the matter," the prosecutor chimed, its voice now noticeably strained. "The illicit substance was found in your cargo hold. This is a verifiable fact." "A fact?" I said, leaning back in my chair. "Let's talk about the nature of a fact. What is a fact, really? Is it an objective truth, or is it merely a shared perception of reality? For example, is it a fact that your legal system is inherently superior, or is that just an opinion, a cultural bias that invalidates this entire proceeding?" "That is a gish gallop," the prosecutor shrieked, its logical tones finally cracking. "You are overwhelming the court with a series of unrelated, specious arguments in a deliberate attempt to derail the primary thesis," I said, raising an eyebrow. "Or am I simply engaging in a robust Socratic dialogue to get to the heart of the matter? It seems to me that you're the one who's getting emotional. Frankly, I'm starting to worry about your ability to remain objective. It's a bad look. The optics, Your Honor, are terrible." The judicator's facets were now glowing a soft, troubled pink. "The defendant's meta-commentary on the proceedings is recursive. Inquisitor, Please refrain from emotional outbursts. Stick to the verifiable data. The prosecutor took a moment to recalibrate its logic centers. Verifiable data. Yes, we have a recording from your ship's log. It is a voice recording of you speaking to your first mate. It played the recording. It was my voice, loud and clear. All right, Jerry, let's get these space ferns loaded up. Client on Cygnus X1 is paying top dollar, and he's not the patient type. The prosecutor turned to me, a look of pure, logical triumph on its face. This is your voice. You admit knowledge of the cargo. The logic is inescapable. Inescapable, is it? I said with a smile. What you have is an audio recording, a series of vibrations in the air. You assume those vibrations were produced by me in that sequence. But have you considered the possibility of a sonic doppelganger? A space parrot? A sophisticated prank by my first mate, Jerry, who, I might add, is a known practical joker? Did you even investigate Jerry? Because if you didn't, this is just a classic appeal to authority, with you being that authority on what my voice sounds like. It's shoddy police work, is what it is. A space parrot, the prosecutor stammered. There are menace in the outer quadrants, I said with a grave nod. They can mimic any sound, but they have no concept of syntax. That's why the sentence structure is so clumsy. It's textbook sonic parrot behavior. Any first-year xenolinguist would have caught that. The judicator's facets flashed a series of frantic, confused colors like a corrupted loading bar. The possibility of a sonic parrot has a statistical probability of 0.0001%. However, it is not zero. The defendant has introduced a sliver of doubt. The burden of proof lies with the prosecution. Inquisitor, can you prove that the recording was not made by a hyper-intelligent, prank-loving space parrot with a grudge against the defendant? The prosecutor just stood there, vibrating. It was trying to calculate the incalculable. It was trying to apply logic to a concept that was born in the fires of pure, unadulterated bullcrap. Arbiter, my second-in-command, a calm and logical being named Lyra, projected into my command chamber. The human resistance has escalated. They have breached the perimeter of Sector 7. Breached the perimeter? I asked, confused. Our energy fences are impenetrable. What weapons did they use? They did not use weapons, Arbiter, Lyra replied, a hint of what might have been synthesite embarrassment in her voice. They used a bake sale. A group of human females offered our sentry drones a baked good they called a brownie. The drone's organic matter sensors were not programmed to register it as a threat. While the drones were analyzing the unexpected gift, the humans simply walked around the fence line. I put my head in my three-fingered hands. We were being outmaneuvered by baked goods. Furthermore, Lyra continued, the leader of this incursion, a human female known only as Karen, is demanding to speak to your manager. I believe, Arbiter, that this refers to you. This was the final indignity. I agreed to a meeting. I would confront the leader of this irrational resistance and attempt to apply logic one last time. I met her in what used to be a town hall. Karen was a human female of terrifyingly average appearance. She was flanked by Dave from Nebraska, who was now wearing a much more elaborate tinfoil hat, and Todd, the leader of the Star Fathers cult, who was carrying a stapler he claimed was a sacred relic. I am Arbiter, I began, my voice calm and reasonable. I am here to understand why you are resisting our benevolence. Karen just crossed her arms and stared at me. Your benevolence is a prison, she snapped. You took away our freedom. We took away your diseases, I counted. Your poverty, your wars. What freedom have you lost? The freedom to be a mess, she shot back. The freedom to make mistakes. The freedom to believe in stupid, crazy things because it makes us feel like we're in control. You gave us a perfect world, and it is the most boring, soulless, and deeply suspicious place I have ever seen. Todd, the cult leader, nodded enthusiastically. She's right. A world without the threat of imminent, self-inflicted doom is a world without meaning. Our star fathers would not want us to live in such a sanitized, uninteresting paradise. They would want us to prove our worth through chaotic, ill-advised acts of faith. Like this. He then proceeded to try and baptize one of my robotic emissaries with a bottle of what appeared to be salad dressing. I tried to reason with them. I showed them data. I showed them projections of their own self-destructive path, the wars and plagues that would have wiped them out in another 200 cycles. Dave from Nebraska just shook his tinfoil-covered head. "That's just what the deep state wants you to think," he muttered. "The data is faked. The pole shift is coming. I've seen the YouTube videos." It was then that I finally understood. The source of their rebellion wasn't a flaw in my plan. The source of their rebellion was their plan. Their entire societal structure was built not on stability, but on the management of self-generated chaos. Conspiracy theories weren't a bug in their system. They were the operating system itself. They created imaginary enemies to unify against, imaginary problems to solve, because the real, existential problems of their own chaotic existence were too terrifying to face. We had taken away their monsters. And in doing so, we had become the new monster. I returned to the tranquility a changed being. My mission had failed, not because of military resistance, but because of a fundamental miscalculation of the human psyche. You cannot force a chaotic system to be logical. You can only redirect the chaos. I convened a meeting with my command staff. "The benevolence protocols have failed," I announced. "We have been attempting to solve a social problem with a logistical solution. It is time to implement a new strategy. We are going to give them back their problems." Over the next week, we began a series of carefully orchestrated corrections. We didn't turn off the free energy. Instead, we introduced an element of chaos into the system, intermittent, unpredictable power outages that would last for just a few minutes. We didn't take away the medical nanites. We just uploaded a new, harmless subroutine that caused 1 in every 10,000 people to experience a temporary and completely harmless side effect of turning their skin a faint, shimmering blue for an hour. The effect was immediate and profound. The anti-mind control groups claimed the power outages were a sign they were winning the vibrational war and that the grid was failing. They declared victory and refocused their efforts on arguing with each other about the proper way to fold a tinfoil hat. The anti-nanite factions were ecstatic about the blue skin side effect. It was the proof they had been looking for. They held massive rallies, celebrating this awakening of the indigo children, a concept my AI informed me was another pre-existing and equally nonsensical human belief system. Their organ harvesting theories were forgotten, replaced by a much more interesting and less overtly rebellious new mystery. For the cult of the Star Fathers, we created a masterpiece. We used our holographic projectors to create a massive, shimmering image of a divine, celestial stapler in the clouds, and then we sent Todd a psychic message in a booming, authoritative voice that simply said, "You're doing great, keep it UP." His church's membership tripled overnight, and their activities became so bizarre and internally focused that they no longer had time to bother our emissaries. We gave them back their harmless mysteries, their petty squabbles, their imaginary monsters. We replaced the one big, terrifying conspiracy, us, with 100 small, manageable, and entertaining ones. The rebellion faded, not with a bang, but with 1,000 distracting whispers. My final report to the Axiom Imperium was a strange one. I declared the pacification of Earth a complete success. The colony was now stable. It was still chaotic, still illogical, still utterly and completely insane. But it was a stable insanity, a self-regulating system of absurdity that was now, for the most part, pointed inward. We had not enlightened them. We had not saved them. We had simply learned how to manage them. We gave them free power, perfect health, and a world without war. And in return, all we had to do was give them a new batch of stupid, harmless things to be afraid of every now and then. And as I looked down at the blue planet, with its petty arguments and its beautiful, chaotic, self-destructive, and resilient people, I felt a new emotion. one my processes couldn't quite define. It was a mixture of terror, frustration, and a strange, illogical sense of paternal affection. The benevolence of the void had failed. Long live the management of the absurd.